Hello and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show. And I'm delighted to go all the way to the other side of the world in Australia to be joined by Nick. How are you, Nick?
Good morning, Andrew. I'm fine. How are you?
I'll tell you what, I am very well. And it is so good to see you. Not only good to see you, but it's good to see you sporting a fantastic new tash.
Well, there's a story behind. There's an unfortunate story behind that. I did, after my incident a couple of weeks ago, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. I ended up with a sort of full castaway desert island beard, and I started shaving it off, and I just got a bit fed up. It took ages to get rid of it. I just left the moustache for a bit. And in the meantime, my 8-year-old son had called me on FaceTime and was just absolutely delighted with this thing that had appeared on my face. So I'm kind of stuck with it now for a little bit at least. I can't disappoint an 8-year-old kid, so I'm stuck. I don't normally have a moustache.
Oh, no, I love it. And what I also loved about it, Nick, is that on your Facebook page, you were telling people that you were a bit worried because you had a client video chat.
That's right. Well, I was a bit concerned about that, but you know, I sat up ready for the Zoom meeting and with them, and then they messaged and said they're having data issues. It turned into a phone call, so it was fine. So I know. So I didn't even get to make my excuses to them. So.
But this is the first public outing, which is fantastic. I love the new tag.
It is.
I also loved, Nick, the picture that your son drew of you. It was superb likeness.
It was very good with a moustache, and that's another reason that I'm guilted into keeping it. You know, because I was going to tell him, I was going to break him the bad news that day and say, look, you've seen the moustache now, son, and that'll be it. Then he hands me over my Father's Day card, which he's drawn with a you know, Sancho Panza. So you know, I'm stuck with it now for a while.
Good. Well, I have to say, in a non-70s porno way, it does suit you.
I've been told that, yes.
Yes, it will probably sort you as well, but typecasting is all there. Very good. Oh, wonderful. Well, I'm so delighted to have you back on. We had you a few weeks back, and after what was a very traumatic time, and the feedback to your brutally honest interview chat with me last time was so powerful, with so many people who said they found comfort because they were in a very similar situation to you.
Right.
And hearing somebody have the bravery to talk about it managed to persuade them that they shouldn't be taking a drastic step. So firstly, thank you for that. And you said, look,
I'm glad to hear that.
And you said to me, you sent me a note saying, look, I'm in a much better place now. And I'd like to come back. And now that I've had the clarity of time to put things in perspective, talk about the lead up and what happened and how you managed to cope, because that will give strength, if you like, to everybody with the clarity, so you can look back on these clearer times to say what happened. So what I'd like to do, if it's not too painful, and I appreciate it probably will be painful, but a powerful thing to do.
That's fine.
Is to go back to August the 13th, which is when we first saw what was effectively, and there's no other way of putting it, a suicide note posted on Facebook. Talk me through the events leading up to that and what happened.
Well, it's I mean, it's difficult to explain. What essentially happened is I'd moved house, and I find I'm one of those people. I don't know why, but I think a lot of people identify with this. I find transitions very difficult. So major life transitions can be very hard for me, very emotional. And so things like changing a job or moving house. We all know that these things are stressful anyway. And travel I find stressful as well. So any sort of transitional thing was stressful. And I'd moved from a place which was it had been associated with the rehabilitation centre I was at last year when I'd got myself sober. And it was sort of moving out of a sort of a comfort zone, you know, and that hit me quite hard. There was also a sort of a personal reason around my son, which I don't want to, we shouldn't go into, but there was a personal reason about missing my son. And you know, I mean, if you're feeling depressed already, you can snap very easily. And suddenly, you know, it just comes on. It comes on very fast. And the loneliness and the hopelessness and the despair suddenly become quite overwhelming, you know, and it can come out of the blue and sideswipe you, and it can be fatal, you know. I mean, it can, I mean, not only is it a miserable experience in itself, it can really knock you for six, and that's exactly what happened to me. And being an alcoholic, or albeit in recovery, but being an alcoholic, I do what alcoholics do, and that was reach for a drink. Now, you know, that just makes it worse. I know that from bitter experience, time and time again. It just makes it much worse. But in your loneliness and your hopelessness and your despair, you know, you are, and your sadness, you're aware that for a few hours at least, you can have some temporary release from that. You know, and I'm not suggesting people do this by any means, but, you know, if you have a drink, we all know what alcohol does to you. It cheers you up, it put you know, that kind of thing. And so, but for me, it doesn't last very long. But that's, you know, for an alcoholic, you know, it's natural to have a drink. It's really bad for me to have a drink, but it's sort of natural as well, if you know what I mean. And the same for people who use drugs. You know, you kind of, you know, it's the wrong thing to do, but you also know that there's going to be some temporary release from the utter misery that you're experiencing in your depression. And so you do that, and inevitably it makes it worse. I mean, I can't remember if I said it to you last time, but I think the last 8 times I've drunk alcohol, I've ended up in hospital. So I can't drink normally. You know, I can't just have a couple of glasses of wine or even a bottle of wine, to be honest. It has to be a lot more than that. And then you get into trouble. You become, you know, you cheer up to, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, and then you become seriously depressed. And you may start on the path to suicidal ideation, you know, thinking about suicide, self-harming, which happened to me, and sadly, extreme despair. And, you know, you need professional help at that point. You need an intervention of some kind, because something bad is going to happen. You know, you're going to lash out in one way or another, either at yourself or someone else, or you're going to become very, very ill as a result of the alcohol you've taken, or even worse, perhaps the drugs you've taken. And, you know, it quickly descends into a spiral of hell, you know, where you are, you know, and before you know it, I was in the back of an ambulance with an oxygen mask. I was unresponsive. I'm hooked up to all sorts of drips. I have ambulance people running around inside the ambulance, not panicking. They weren't panicking, but they were certainly concerned. And, you know, and I do remember an ambulance person saying to me, hold on, mate, you're going to live, you're going to be all right, you know. But they were worried. I mean, it's a life or death situation, you know. So, you know, to think back on that is hard, and it is sort of painful, but also to talk about it helps. So don't, you know, worry about that. But yeah, I mean, that's what led me into my despair. That I think I ended up in hospital twice over that episode, and was eventually discharged. I thought I might get sectioned, which wasn't such a bad idea at the time, but I didn't. They decided to release me, and with the support from my friends, and also, you know, with support, with talking to you helped. Realizing there was so much love and support for me on Facebook, and thinking of my son as well. These are the things that pull you through. Also, I went to see a doctor who was very proactive about helping me. And put me on new medication and things like that, and so all that is shaped up pretty well. But you know, everyone has their breaking point, you know, and you sometimes you just can't see it coming, and that's the thing, and you can snap very quickly. And that snap can be very dangerous indeed.
I think, as you say, Nick, it affects people in different ways. In a way, the reasons for it, whilst they're very, very pertinent, they're not relevant as to why people are driven to that moment. I mean, there is that series, and suicide has been in the news recently, obviously, with the person who actually committed suicide on Facebook, and the massive impact that had around the world, with people seeing it on TikTok and various other things. And people, in a way, that what drives people to that moment will change on an individual basis. They have that series about 13 reasons why, and the whole thing.
Well, that's right. Yeah. Well, I posted it on my Facebook yesterday, actually, and I may post it on my website. But yesterday was Worldwide Suicide Prevention Day, and in a timely manner. And a friend had posted this project from New Zealand called 1,000 Letters. And it's 1,000 letters collated by people who, it's tragic, but it's the final letter they wrote before committing suicide. And it drew some conclusions. It's a research-based, it's not just a collection of letters, it's actual, peer-reviewed research. And they found that some of the conclusions they drew, that suicidal people, it's often, they know that they're loved, for instance, and they reciprocate that love to the people who love them, but that doesn't help, because somehow that makes it worse.
Oh.
It's like
it disappeared for a moment, but you're
there was a phone call. Sorry, there was a call. Yeah, so that doesn't help. In some ways, a suicidal person will think, well, it will still solve the problem if I'm not here anymore. And also, it's found that suicidal people, they don't want to die necessarily. They just want peace. They just want to stop the pain in their head hurting. And that's kind of the motive. That would have been my motivation. If you're in so much pain from your depression or whatever your mental health problem is, you just want peace. You just want it to stop. And the only peace you get, I've found, is sometimes when you sleep. And so logically, if you extend that and say, well, then, sorry, someone is being a bit too persistent with their phone call. Then if I just keep sleeping, like Hamlet suggested in his great soliloquy, that's that sleep of death, he called it, is suddenly becomes a very compelling issue in your mind. And it's quite a complicated, that's what was driving me. And I mean, everyone is different, but as you say, but yeah, it's something to do with simply wanting peace and simply wanting to stop the pain, and that's a very compelling thing.
Yeah, and it's driving to that moment. I mean, obviously, you say your friend has compiled this list of 1,000 suicide notes, if you like, and the sort of common pattern. I mean, the good news, if there is good news, is that you posted yours on Facebook, which gave people an opportunity to show their love and support. What was your rationale? I know we've touched on this beforehand, but talk to me about your rationale for posting it on Facebook.
I suppose I wanted to, it's a good question. I mean, on a question, about suicide people, do suicidal people really want to die? Well, no, but you do want the pain to stop. So I was kind of in a halfway position where I wasn't thinking straight, to put it mildly. I'd also been drinking, where I felt a need to self-harm, first of all, which is you're on a suicidal path if you're doing that, and did so as well. I went ahead with that, and suddenly you're in a bit of a state. You're sort of on the way, but also you're alarmed. I was alarmed by what was happening, and I didn't feel in control of it really, and so I reached out for help, which I don't have. This isn't meant to sound like a sob story, but I don't have that many close friends in the immediate vicinity in the area I'm living. I do have a lot of close friends on Facebook. Obviously, I'm English. I'm living in Australia. A lot of my friends are British. So the rationale was to just call it a cry for help, if you will. I mean, that's maybe what it was, but which is fine. People say, oh, it's just, you hear people dismiss suicidal comments and think, oh, it's just a cry for help. Well, if someone is talking about suicide and they're even suggesting it in their mind and they've made a comment like that, they're suicidal. They're suicidal people. So when people say it's just a cry for help, get a cry for help. It's a person who's desperately in need, and that is a tragic situation. And I was very lucky that people reached out to me. If I don't know. I was a mess. There was blood. I mean, it was visceral. It was a real mess. So, you know, that was my rationale. I think my rationale was confused. I reached out for help. That's it, really.
And thank goodness you did. And as you say, and it's trying to get, because people in similar sort of situations will hear your story. And actually, as we touched on last time, the fact that you did say in your mind, look, I've got to reach out. I've got to tell people this.
Yes.
Is what I'm thinking. Were you hoping that people were going to respond? Was that the idea of posting what you posted?
Well, I don't know, because, you know, it's a good question. Someone sent the police round. Someone in Australia, a friend of mine, called the police. And before I knew it, I was lying on my bed, like, in a complete state, obviously having sent this message and this note, a suicide note. And then next thing I know, there's two coppers standing there, you know, shining a torch into my face. So, and a friend had called the police. Now, my immediate reaction was to I told them I was okay, and you know, but was to lash out on Facebook and to say whoever sent the police around is an idiot. That's what I said. How ungrateful can you be, right? But you're not thinking straight. And because if you're on the path to killing yourself, well, perhaps you don't want to be around anymore. You know, and the police obviously come and stop that. They take the knife out of your hand. They help you. They call an ambulance and what have you. So, of course, I've since apologised to the friend who kindly sent the police around and had the courage and compassion to do that. And she's fine. She understands that it's fine. But and thank God she did, because I don't know what would have happened next. I don't know. You know, who knows? And you know, I was on a pathway to somewhere that wasn't a good place. You know. Yeah.
And it is, I mean, as I said, I witnessed all the outpouring of love and support, and also your comment to your friend who did call the police in the end, and thank goodness you managed to get that. What made you change your mind?
I think, well, when I went to hospital and then I got out again and still felt in the same condition, and I had to end up going back to hospital after another incident. I think what made me change my mind was a conversation I had with a friend of mine who runs the rehab that I went to last year, and he said, if you can't, you know, do it for your son. Now I know that's something that sometimes that resounds with suicidal people, that kind of appeal. Sometimes it doesn't. You know, sometimes they just are convinced that their families will be somehow better off without them, which isn't true. But you can convince yourself of that quite easily. But for me, it had a real effect, because I'm aware that if you commit suicide, the effect it can have on your children over their life. My son is 8, for instance, and he adores me. You know, I'm his hero, obviously, at that age. He probably won't adore me when he's 14 or 15 or something, when I'm stopping him going to the nightclub or whatever. But that's the way it is when they're and you know, without me in his life, you know, suicidal kids. There's a statistic out there somewhere that says that the children of people who've committed suicide are much more likely to go on and commit suicide themselves, or have, you know, or become very depressed or alcoholic or something. And that the thought of harming my son in any way whatsoever is absolutely horrific to me. And I you know, in the midst of your depression and your sadness, I'd lost sight of that. But when it was brought back home to me, that was the impact for me that made me think, I can't, you know, what would anyone say to him? How would they break the news to him? You know, it was too horrific for words for me. So, you know, that was my reason for deciding to try again to get well. And you know, with the intervention of medical authorities and a change in medication and things like that helped. So.
And it really is those moments. So there was the outpouring of love and support that you had on Facebook when you posted your suicide note.
That helped too. Yes, that helped hugely.
Did you read those at the time?
Yeah, some of them. Some of them, and some of them I didn't. I mean, I was in a very altered state of consciousness, to put it mildly. And I did read some of them. Some of them didn't sink home. Some of them were critical. Some of them were full of love and compassion. Some of them, and I was reading them, not taking them in. It sort of took a little while for a lot of that to sink in at first. But yeah, it did help. It did help enormously. I could feel the love, even if I wasn't quite, connected. I was disassociated a little bit from everything, but I could see that there was a lot of love there and support. And yeah, that does help. It really does help. And it's different. I mean, the thing with alcohol is, I mean, given the fact that I'm an alcoholic, is it's a seriously powerful, this is what people forget about it, it's a powerful mind-altering substance. And I think if you said to anyone, most normal people, hey, should we take a powerful, toxic, mind-altering substance tonight? Most people would say, no, of course not, But that's what you're doing when you take alcohol. Now, I don't mean just a glass of wine or a couple of glasses of wine or whatever, or getting a bit squiffy. But over time, that's what it is. And it will do really, really weird things to your mind. And you become disassociated very fast. You don't know what you're thinking, you don't know what you're talking about, obviously, anymore. And it's not just normal drunk either. If you're at my stage, it's something else. You're temporarily insane. The psychiatrist I spoke to in hospital referred to it as a kind of a temporary schizophrenia, even sometimes. So that's the level you can get to, and so yes, I was taking in some of the information and I could feel the love, and that helped. Some of it I didn't, obviously, because I lashed out at a friend who tried to help me. And I, my emotions were all over the place, basically.
And just looking at the timing of that then, Nick, because you say you lashed out at a friend, and we saw your post about that.
Yeah.
You came around because the police were at your door. Did they break the door down?
No, they I just moved to this place. They I mean, it was an odd hour of the morning. I mean, I don't know what time it was in Australia, but it was, I don't know, 3 in the morning or something. They knocked at the front door, and my new landlady, who'd only just met me, who I told her I was a recovering alcoholic. I told her I was a depressive. I told her I always tell people, and she sort of went downstairs and was surprised, to put it mildly, to find 2 burly police officers saying, we're after Nick Jordan. Apparently he's in danger, his life's in danger. So she was very alarmed, obviously. But they didn't break the door down. But, they came in and did what they did. They were very good, actually. They're extremely understanding, and, they were very good, yeah.
So when did you make the post criticising your friend? Because I understand the police, the burly policeman, they woke your landlady up in the middle of the night, came to your room in the place. You at some stage wrote calling this person who'd called the police an idiot. At what stage did you write that post?
I think I must have been in hospital at that point, because I'm pretty sure from my hazy recollection of events that the police called an ambulance. And waited with me whilst the ambulance came. So either I did it then while they were waiting, or I did it in hospital. Yeah, because I wasn't sectioned, so they didn't take my phone away. If you get sectioned, they take your digital equipment away from you, obviously. So at some point, and I was still drunk, and I was still in despair at that point. And I didn't know what was happening really. So yeah.
So your mind was all over the place. You saw these comforting notes on Facebook in response to your suicide note, but you then posted criticizing the person, calling them an idiot, because
yes.
So, I get it in the whole haze of things. Were you at that stage? Did you still want to escape it all? Was that your plan?
I think so. Yeah, I think you've kind of been interrupted in your temporary insanity to hurt yourself at least, or have suicide ideation, as they call it, where you're thinking of suicide. I also remember being annoyed that the landlady had been disturbed because she was my new landlady, and I mean, although I told her everything in advance, I said, look, I am a recovering alcoholic, but I'm well behaved mostly. And then suddenly that promise had been broken, So so I remember being annoyed about that, but she was fine about it. I mean, she said, well, no, if you're in trouble, you need help. Your friend obviously loves you and did the right thing, So we had that conversation a bit later. So yeah, I mean, look, I didn't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking straight. It was my head was all over the place, you know, at that point. You're caught between life and death, between drunkenness and you're insane. You are temporarily insane. That's what's happened, you know. That's what happens to alcoholics. I don't know how much I've had to drink. I mean, it must have been a lot. And, you know, I mean, typically 4 bottles of wine would be a sort of a normal way of getting into that kind of condition. And it's a lot of alcohol, actually. And it gets drunk very, very quickly as well, if you're like me. So you don't just sip a glass of wine discreetly, getting slowly drunk. And it's quite an ugly scene, you know, really. So, you know, I was insane, basically, for that period of time.
And had you, well, 2 things. One, had you thought of suicide beforehand, and have you ever previously made an attempt?
Yes. So I had been taken into hospital before, a couple of years back. It was more of a self-harming incident, but I'd made a suicidal plan, which is something doctors worry about. So there's suicide ideation, as I keep calling it, which is where you have ideas about, so you start to think about suicide, which is already big red flags, obviously. But a question they'll often ask you in a hospital, or a doctor will ask you, is, did you have a plan? What were you going to do? Were you going to, you know, how are you going to commit suicide? And I had a plan before, which was to jump off a tall building. And I had also engaged myself in self-harm before, which involved cutting my wrists. I'm sorry to say, but it's you know, it's quite a common way. And also, I think that self-harm is the way you drink, as I've just mentioned, the way you drink as an alcoholic is also self-harming. You know, it's not, as I say, polite sips of wine. It's guzzling an entire bottle within the space of 5 minutes, which is, your liver doesn't have a chance to process things at all, you know, let alone your head or anything. And it's a self-harming way of drinking, you know. And drug users, obviously, people who, you know, take intravenous drugs or things like that, is clearly self-harming, right? So all that is self-harm. And so I've engaged in quite a lot of that from time to time over the, you know, sadly over the last couple of years. But, you know, I mean, I would say there were 2 serious incidents, including the one we've just discussed, the recent one, where, you know, it came a little bit too close. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's, as we touched on last time, that there are two aspects to this. There's one, people who are watching this who'll be feeling the same sort of desperate position you felt in. And they would want to say, well, what would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I would say, don't do it. I totally understand where you're coming from. I understand the agony that leads you into suicidal despair. But I would, if you are able, and if you can find it somewhere within you, reach out for help. You know, do reach out. I know it's an old, it sounds like a cliche now, reach out for help. And there are all sorts of reasons why people don't reach out for help, which I fully understand. But, you know, it's an evolutionary thing. Every fiber of it may not feel like it, but every fiber of your body and your mind is fighting for you to survive. It's not natural, you know, for you to end your life early. It's against the evolutionary flow of things. And there is a survival instinct in there somewhere. And however you tap into that is however you tap into that. You know, if you want to put a message on social media, of course, to the Samaritans or Lifeline or whatever, go around the neighbors, flag a car down, I don't care. Try and stop yourself, because, you know, you know, again, it sounds like a cliche, but it is true. You are worth a lot more than that. And the damage it will do to your family is irreparable. And this is putting a bit of a guilt trip on people, but it worked for me. And the damage it will do to your family and your children is so immense and vast that I can't even begin to describe it. So, you know, and I've seen that happen to other people as well. So just please try and reach for help. You know, please try and reach for help.
And it's seeing that sort of pattern. As you said, there are lots of resources out there. And if people get familiar with those beforehand, I mean, you've got your own website, Deep Sober.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
I'm always happy to plug your website, because I think it's good and it's powerful when people hear other people's experiences, and to read that now before it gets too late. So you've got those resources. You've got the thing about, I'm starting to feel a bit bad in myself. I can see this pattern happening. Getting those resources early must be helpful.
It is, yeah. And I think I would say as well, you know, there's deepsober.com, but there's a whole world of recovery and sobriety blogs out there, some of which are very, very good indeed. And the people who write them are inevitably recovering addicts. And there's a whole bunch of good podcasts as well. Read them, have a read, you know, because one of the things I think people feel in their despair, in their depression, in their alcoholism, one of the crushing things you feel is utter loneliness. That even I tell you, you can be in a room full of people and still feel like the loneliest, most depressed person in the world. You can be surrounded by your friends even, and seem cheerful even, and still be depressed and lonely. But the thing is, you're not alone, because there are millions of people literally out there, and thousands of them are writing blogs. Some of them are excellent. They're top flight writing. They're accessible. They've got great resources on them. And yeah, familiarize yourself with them. Find a blog that you like, find a style that you like. Maybe you want to read a female blogger, maybe you want to read a male, maybe, well, you know, there are blogs for teenagers. There are all sorts of things out there. Read them. Get a shot. If you're feeling depressed and suicidal, and or you have these horrible, weird thoughts coming into your mind, have a read of these things, because one of the first things it will tell you is you are connecting with someone. You know, it's been said by the British journalist Johann Hari that the opposite of addiction is connection. It's not sobriety, it's connection, because an addict feels essentially disconnected from the world and from everybody. And so to get some sense of connection into your life is really important. And if it takes a blog to do that, or watching your show, for instance, or listening to a podcast dealing with sobriety, do that straight away. Do it straight away, and it will help.
No, absolutely. And the other thing then, apart from people going through these struggles, it's those who have a loved one or a neighbor or a friend, or even somebody who's a work colleague, maybe not so connected, but they want to do the right thing. What should they be doing when they see people are suicidal?
Well, I mean, again, they should take it very seriously. I mean, again, if someone even mentions to you that they've thought about it, you need to perk up your ears and listen. If you want to help them, then you need to perk up your ears and listen, because some people don't ever mention it, and there's you know, they just take their own lives, and they may have been planning that for years, but there's not a lot you can do about that if you don't realize, I suppose. But if people have perked their, you know, if someone mentions suicide, my radar starts going a little bit there, because, you know, and I think what those people should do again is connect. They need to reach out for help. Now, they can speak to suicide crisis lines as well, get some advice how they can help their friends. Well, I'm not a clinician, so I can't, you know, but it's, I mean, if the friend is receptive, the suicidal friend that is, you could do a lot worse than go to a doctor, and get some kind of mental health plan in place, where you see a psychologist or a therapist. I think it's available on the NHS. You can get a certain amount for a free time, and just if they're amenable to that. Sometimes people are very resistant, you know, but just talk to them, you know. And I think just keep that level of connection up, and remind them that they're loved, remind them that they're needed, and that kind of thing. It can be very distressing to hear your friends talk about suicide, but you know, you need help as well. You can't help them on your own. So, you know, go to organizations like Al-Anon, for instance, who support the friends and families of alcoholics who may be suicidal or whatever, and you know, phone Samaritans yourself. There's no shame in it, you know, and talk to them, and they'll point you towards the right resources. But you need connection and help too.
And I think that's the important thing, is that if people are prepared in the same way as they had this big campaign about preparing in case somebody has a stroke or somebody has a heart attack, this is what you should do. Telling people, and I always say about any awareness day, it should be an awareness year, an awareness lifetime. But shine a spotlight. We've just had World Suicide Prevention Day, and that's been going on for a number of years, I think since 2003. It's great to shine a spotlight on it, but we should use this as an opportunity to educate people, because they will be. Your immediate circle will have somebody who's having suicidal thoughts. So to be prepared for that sort of stuff, to work out what really makes a difference and what they could say, is very powerful. So as you say, taking it seriously, reminding that they're loved, reminding them of the consequences of their actions if they were to do the final act. But you also had on social media, and I saw this on your post as well, a bit of a backlash where some people would call it trolls. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, there was a bit of a backlash, and I think some people felt that, you know, putting a suicide note on Facebook or whatever is was somehow a false. Someone called it performative, was a word they used. So it was like it was a performance, where it wasn't a performance. It wasn't a performance in my mind. I'll tell you that for nothing. But yeah, there was a bit of a backlash, and I wondered about that. And I kind of didn't want to get involved in that discussion with them. I mean, I did unfriend a couple of people, but just politely. I just left it because I'm aware that in some people's, I felt it was possibly that they'd been very triggered by it, you know, and I'm aware that in a couple of those people's lives that they have had issues as well. And I can't really say any more about that, but it you know, suicide is a personal matter for them too. And perhaps they just kicked back against it, reacted negatively. They didn't want to see it or hear it. I don't know. I can't really speak for them. But I don't feel any anger or resentment about it. You know, I did what I felt I had to do, you know, and so should you, whoever's watching and feels that way, you know, reach out for help. You know, it's fine.
And so often, I mean, sometimes people, it is a cry for help, as you say, becomes a bit of a cliche, but it is actually a cry for help. And thank goodness that people do that, so they can watch the signs. And so often, even with the chap, I won't mention his name because obviously family connections with, and people are still very affected by what happened, where somebody took their life live on Facebook, and the impact of that. His close friends were saying similar situation. He was apparently very, very drunk and probably didn't intend to, but this is what he was doing. And that's the tragedy, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think that's exactly. I mean, that's part of the problem is a lot of, you know, a lot of people who have suicided are, I don't know statistics, but they may well be intoxicated when it happens, you know, and may well be then having, if they've survived the suicide attempt, have had a second thought, you know. So yes, it is. It does involve intoxication. It's a serious mental health issue. You know, if you've tried to kill yourself, if you have suicide ideation, you have a serious. I'm afraid to say, but you do have a serious mental health issue, and that needs to be addressed. You can't really get out of that on your own. In some ways, you can be stopped, and then you can be helped. You may need professional help. You may need to go to some kind of therapy or support group, but you know, you do need help. And yeah, I mean, you know, what happened to that poor man on Facebook is dreadful. Of course it is. And you know, yeah, I mean, I don't want to comment on that further really, because it's awful. But yeah, I mean, intoxication does play a big part in it, and I'm sure that, you know, a lot of those people would have regretted their actions later, sadly, very tragically.
And the other thing which we touched on last time is obviously one of the saving factors for you was the realization of the impact on your son, if you weren't here. And you talked to me last time about how you'd explain to your son about your alcoholism, and you gave the analogy in language that he would understand. If you eating sweets is what you said. If you had one sweet he'd really enjoyed, if he had two he'd still enjoy it, but he ate a whole bag full, he'd start to feel sick. And that's how you explained your alcoholism. Have you spoken to him about your suicide attempt? No,
because he's too young, and he just wants to see his dad well. Between me and his mum, we've come to an agreement that we're not using labels at the moment. So I don't call it alcoholism. I don't call it depression. We just say that, what I say is that sometimes I get very, very sad. That's all. And but it passes, and then I feel better. And he understands. So it's kind of age appropriate language. And I don't think that taking it to an explanation about self-harm or suicide is it's just going to frighten him, right? So we'll have that discussion, you know, because I mean, to be honest, I write about this publicly. I speak about it publicly. He's going to come to an age where he, you know, I'm not ashamed of my alcoholism, for instance. I want to deal with it, but there's going to come a point where he's going to, I don't know, read my website or read my book or read my something, you know, and I want to have that conversation with him. But when the time's ready, you know, and I want him to know, and I know his mum would agree, I'm sure, that if he ever feels like that he can turn to his parents as well. Not everyone sometimes feels they can, you know. But I want him to know that if he develops an ism of some kind in his life, that that's okay. You know, he's not going to be judged by us, and that we're there to help him, and that we'll direct him to the right place. So no, not yet. No, I'm not going to talk to him about that yet.
And I think, as you say, it's telling people that it's okay not to be okay, and that actually,
absolutely,
they're not alone when they have this situation. And I think
no,
getting that realization. I touched on this last time. I always say this to you, is that you're having the bravery to speak about it, to write about it on your website, deepsober.com. It gives people the power in a similar situation to think, look, you're not alone. Here are the resources when you're feeling low, and everybody feels low at different times. Some people go even lower into the depths of despair and need a bit extra help. There are those resources. And I would urge people, go to it today. Go to deepsober.com today. Have a look at that. Look at the resources, not just if you're feeling in a low state, but there are people around you who will be in that low state. Because I do think forewarned is forearmed, isn't it?
It is. I mean, prevention is always better than cure. And, you know, there's no cure for suicide. So, you know, to be blunt about it. So, you know, there's no, well, you know, stating the obvious, isn't it, really? So prevention is better than the cure. So, yeah, go and have a look at the resources, and also read the journey that other people have been on, you know, because it's not just my voice, by the way. We're including new writers on the site, and they've been through a different range of issues. Read through the journey they've been on, because it will be the stories will be different, but the experience is the same. It will be remarkably, we say in Alcoholics Anonymous, look for the similarities, not the differences. So when someone's talking, their experience of alcoholism, for instance, may be completely different from yours, but I can tell you now 90% of it is the same. And immediately you start to get that connection that I've talked about, that I find is so important with depressed and suicidal and alcoholic or drug addicted people. They've lost connection. And somehow you need to get that back. So what we offer on the website is stories, some of which are humorous, because I found that can help. Some of which are not. Sometimes humor is just not appropriate. But they are written by people who've been there, done that, seen it, and totally understand what you're going through right now, and do not judge you either, you know. And they don't judge you, because sometimes alcoholics do terrible things, you know. They drink drive, they do all sorts of things, and you feel very bad about that. But lots of people have done it, you know, and at an AA meeting or at websites like mine or the other ones that we've mentioned, you will not be judged for your behavior. You know, you will not be judged. That's not the place for it. You're welcome. And we're here to help, you know, we're here to help. And
finally, Nick, you yourself, where do you see yourself at the moment? How are you feeling in yourself?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'm good. I mean, a lot better than I was, obviously, and I feel much better. I've got a very good doctor. I've got a mental health care plan in place, so I'm seeing a psychologist next week. I'm also going to see a psychiatrist for a full assessment, because maybe there's something more deeper rooted going on. I don't know. I can't speculate, but maybe, I don't know, ADHD or bipolar, or I don't know. But that will tell me what's happening. So if there's a more serious problem, that can be addressed. Again, we're talking about prevention here. So, you know, I've got a very proactive GP. I've got some very proactive friends from Alcoholics Anonymous who wouldn't let me go off the phone, you know, over the last couple of weeks, and were there for me. And all that has helped enormously. So I feel great. You know, and I've got some projects that I'm working on, and that helps, that distracts me. And, you know, the feedback I've had from people has been so loving and positive. So, you know, there is a lot to live for, despite what you may think. And, you know, you've just got to take it. My mantra is one of the AA mantras is 1 day at a time. And sometimes, you know, that goes down to 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time. But the seconds become minutes, the minutes become hours, the hours become days, weeks, months, and years. And before you know it, you're back on track, you know. And that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
And so since the episode, let's say August the 13th, it's almost a whole month has gone.
Yeah.
Have you had darker moments, and how did you talk yourself out of it?
I did. I had one dark moment where I'd been sober for a few days, and I suddenly I was clearing my room out of the empty bottles of wine that had piled up, you know, and I found one that still had half a bottle. It was half full. And it was immediately triggering. I was only 3 or 4 days sober, and I didn't drink it. But I just thought, I'm going to go get some more wine. I'm going to leave the house. I'm going to go and have a drink, you know. And it's because it's a new place to me, this house. I couldn't lock the door for some reason. I couldn't, sometimes certain locks take a bit of jimmying, and I couldn't lock the door, and I didn't want to leave the house open. I became incredibly frustrated because I was desperate for a drink. And then I just couldn't do it eventually. And do you know what? The moment passed. And I went back upstairs, poured the wine away, threw the bottles away. And it's hard. So, I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous would tell you that's your higher power looking after you. That somewhere, whoever it is looking after you has intervened. Call it what you will, call it good luck. But it gave me a bit of breathing space. And in my frustration, I was shaking the door, but I couldn't leave the house unlocked. I'm not going to do that. And it passed. The moment passed. And I think some kind of, if you are thinking of having a drink in your despair, some kind of distraction technique does work. And it's hard for me. I'm a quite spiritual person, and it's hard to see those things as just a coincidence sometimes. I'm not saying that God stopped me locking the door, but there's a kind of there's a moment where you think, did that happen on purpose? So I have had darker days, but I have stayed sober, and I do feel much more positive now. Yeah.
Well, Nick, it is so good to see you, even with your porn moustache. I think it's great. Do keep me posted. Come back anytime, because I know, as I say, a lot of people take comfort. Go along today to deepsober.com to anybody who's watching.
Please do.
But for now, Nick, thank you very much for joining me again.
Thank you, Andrew. Nice to speak to you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye. Bye.
So thank you again to Nick for joining me. If you are affected by any of the issues, do reach out. Nick has his own site, deepsober.com, and there are lots of other resources mentioned there and various other places as well. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about your own experiences, or you have tips or anything, do feel free to get in touch. guests@octopustv.com. That's guests@octopustv.com. But for me, for now, thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.